Once upon a time, so far back that even records hesitate to remember it, there was a village called Harrowfield. It existed in a narrow age between certainty and superstition, when maps were drawn by hand and erased just as easily, and when entire places could vanish without causing alarm. What survives of Harrowfield now comes only from fragments: a parish register with its final pages missing, a schoolteacher's diary stained by damp soil, and a single warning written in the margin of a county ledger decades later, advising future surveyors to leave the valley alone. Harrowfield lay in a shallow basin of land where the earth curved inward, forming a natural hollow that never quite felt natural. Dense pine forests encircled it on all sides, their trunks rising so close together that sunlight struggled to reach the valley floor. Morning light arrived late, filtering weakly through needles and branches, and by afternoon the shadows returned. Even in summer, Harrowfield felt dim. In winter it felt buried. Sound behaved strangely there. Voices faded quickly, as if the air itself absorbed them. Footsteps landed without echo, dull and unfinished. Visitors often spoke of pressure in their chests, or a sudden sense of unease, though nothing outwardly appeared wrong. Most passed through without stopping. Those who did stop rarely stayed long. In the year 1867, 47 people lived in Harrowfield. They were farmers, tradesmen, and families bound by routine more than ambition. Their fields were narrow, their harvests modest. Animals grazed close to home and rarely wandered beyond the tree line. The villagers themselves were reserved, not unfriendly but watchful, as if listening for something that never fully revealed itself. At the center of the village stood a stone church. No one remembered its construction. Older residents insisted it had always been there, long before their grandparents were born. Parish records suggested the church predated the settlement itself, as though the village had formed around it rather than the other way around. The stone was dark and smooth, worn not by weather but by constant pressure. When touched, it felt colder than the surrounding air. Father Aldous Merrin arrived in Harrowfield 10 years before its disappearance. At first, he believed the village merely isolated. Over time, small details troubled him. Candles burned unevenly within the church, their flames bending subtly downward. The stone floor felt warmer at dawn than at dusk. During early morning prayers, kneeling alone before the altar, he felt a faint vibration beneath the tiles. It was steady and controlled, not violent or sudden. He described it privately as something held back, something waiting. He told no one. Autumn of 1867 came early. The air grew sharp by late September, and by October the first snow fell, thick, heavy, and quiet. It settled unevenly around homes and barns, forming smooth, rounded drifts. Paths disappeared within minutes, not blown away by wind, but flattened, as if pressed down from below. Men clearing snow noticed their shovels struck resistance sooner than expected. The ground felt dense, reluctant to open. Animals reacted first. Dogs refused to lie directly on the earth, circling restlessly before settling on wood or stone. Horses stamped and pulled at reins, eyes wide, breath fogging the cold air. Chickens clustered tightly together at night, wings lifted slightly as if bracing against something unseen. Then the children noticed. Eleanor Wick, the village schoolteacher, kept a careful diary, never intending it for anyone else. In late October, her entries began to change. She wrote of lessons interrupted by sudden stillness. Children would stop writing mid-word, heads tilting as though listening. When asked what troubled them, they spoke quietly of movement beneath the floorboards, of warmth rising through the wood, of something slow and deep beneath their feet. One boy refused to sit, insisting the floor curved upward. When he remained still too long, Eleanor dismissed it at first, attributing it to nerves and winter gloom. Then, during a long silence, she felt it herself, a gentle pressure, barely noticeable, present only when the room was quiet. The church bell rang by itself for the first time on November 1st, just before dawn. The sound carried strangely, not outward across the valley, but downward. Several villagers later said it felt as though the ringing sank into the ground beneath their boots. Father Aldous inspected the tower carefully. The rope hung untouched. The air was still, yet the bell swayed faintly, responding to something unseen. Margaret Bellows disappeared on November 6th. She had gone to gather firewood near the forest edge and never returned. Her basket was found upright beside a tree, neatly arranged. There were no footprints leading away. The snow nearby bore a shallow, rounded depression, smooth and clean, as though something heavy had rested there briefly before lifting away. The disappearance unsettled the village, but panic did not come immediately. Accidents happened. People wandered off. Life continued, though conversations grew quieter and glances lingered longer on the ground beneath their feet. Within days, others vanished. A shepherd standing among his flock was gone between one breath and the next. A baker disappeared between oven and counter, loaves left cooling where his hands had set them. A child vanished from a locked bedroom without sound or struggle. Each home remained untouched. Fires burned low. Beds stayed warm long after their occupants were gone. Fear seeped into Harrowfield slowly, like frost creeping through stone. Villagers began to gather inside the church at night, believing closeness might protect them. Instead, the air felt heavier there. During prayer, the faint trembling beneath the floor returned, stronger now, more deliberate. Some swore the stone beneath their knees softened slightly, yielding just enough to be noticed. One evening, during a crowded prayer, Thomas Greaves collapsed screaming that the floor was bending toward him. When others dragged him outside, his palms were torn raw, skin split, as though he had tried to grip something that moved beneath the stone. By the beginning of December, fewer than half the villagers remained, and the ground beneath Harrowfield had begun to listen. By early December, the village no longer slept all at once. Lamps burned through the night in scattered houses, their light dimmed by frost-coated windows. Those who closed their eyes did so in shifts, fearing what might happen if the ground noticed their stillness. Eleanor Wick wrote that silence had become dangerous. When the village fell quiet, the pressure beneath the floors grew stronger, as though something below was paying closer attention. The knocking began soon after. It always came from beneath the houses. 3 slow taps, a pause long enough for breath to catch, then 3 more. The sound was not loud, but it was unmistakable, traveling upward through wood and bone rather than air. Those who heard it described the same sensation, a sudden awareness of being counted. The first man who answered the knocking was Samuel Price. He lifted a loose floorboard in his kitchen and leaned down with a lantern, calling into the dark earth below. His wife watched from the doorway as the light disappeared, lowered carefully as though by his own hands. She never heard him cry out. By morning, the floorboards lay neatly back in place, dustless, as if they had never been disturbed. Those who refused to answer fared no better. Several villagers barricaded themselves inside the church, believing stone might resist what wood could not. Father Aldous remained with them, though his confidence had faded. He wrote one final entry in the parish log, his handwriting tight and controlled, noting that the vibration beneath the altar now followed a pattern, long, measured intervals, like breathing shared by many lungs. Eleanor's diary grew calmer as the days passed, which unsettled those who later read it more than panic ever could have. She wrote of understanding, of realizing that Harrowfield had not been chosen by chance, that the church had been placed where it was to mark something long before the village existed. She described dreams of descending corridors beneath the valley, their walls smooth and warm, lined with figures standing shoulder to shoulder. They did not move. They did not speak, yet she felt their awareness pressing outward, patient and complete. Attempts to flee the valley failed. One family loaded a wagon at dawn and followed the northern road for hours, passing familiar trees again and again until dusk fell and the southern tree line emerged ahead of them. Horses refused to cross the valley's edge, planting their hooves and trembling until harnesses snapped. A man walking alone marked trees with his knife as he went, only to find the same marks reappearing ahead of him, freshly cut. The valley no longer released those within it. On the night of December 17th, the remaining villagers gathered one last time in the church. Snow pressed heavily against the doors. The air inside felt thick, warm, almost close. The vibration beneath the floor rose steadily, no longer subtle. Several people wept quietly. Others sat in silence, eyes fixed on the stone beneath their feet. Father Aldous stood before them and removed his collar. He placed it carefully on the altar, smoothing it flat. His voice did not shake as he spoke, though later accounts suggest he did not address the people at all. He spoke downward, toward the floor, as if responding to something that had finally asked. At first light, the ground began to move. There was no cracking, no collapse. The church lowered itself into the earth with terrible grace, stone sinking as though into softened clay. Walls remained upright. Windows stayed whole. The snow around the foundation slid inward, filling the space left behind. The villagers watched, unable to run, unable to look away. Father Aldous stepped forward calmly and vanished, as the floor accepted him without sound. By dawn, Harrowfield stood empty. When officials arrived in February of 1868, they found a village preserved in unnatural stillness. Chimneys bore smoke stains. Doors remained closed. Inside homes, meals lay unfinished. Bread hardened where it had cooled half-cut. Chairs faced hearths. Coats hung by doors, waiting for bodies that would never return. No footprints marked the snow between buildings. Surveyors noted that every structure sat lower than expected, as though pressed downward and held there. Their tools met resistance just beneath the surface. The soil felt compacted from below, dense and unyielding. Instruments detected vast hollow spaces beneath the village, structured chambers, arranged deliberately, connected by corridors without entrances. One survey assistant was lowered by rope into a shallow opening near the church site. He later described walls that did not feel like earth, but something smoother, warmer, faintly yielding beneath his gloves. His lantern light behaved oddly, illuminating surfaces that should not have existed. Grooves lined the walls, evenly spaced, worn rather than carved, as though something had rested there for long periods. The descent ended abruptly when the rope began to vibrate. Not sway, vibrate. When they pulled him up, his hands shook uncontrollably. He claimed he heard movement below after the lantern went out, slow, coordinated, as though something vast was adjusting itself. The site was condemned. Reports were sealed. Maps were redrawn. Harrowfield was erased. Years passed, but the valley resisted forgetting. A hunter in the 1880s reported hearing bells ringing underground while camped nearby. A shepherd claimed the ground beneath his flock grew warm at dusk, forcing the animals to scatter. In 1902, a proposed rail survey through the region was abandoned after repeated equipment failures and reports of disorientation. One engineer wrote that distances seemed to shorten without explanation, as though the land pulled measurements inward. In 1919, a land assessor entered the valley at dawn and returned shaken. He wrote that his compass spun uselessly, and his watch stopped. When he struck the ground with his spade, the vibration that followed did not fade. It answered. He knelt and pressed his ear to the soil and swore he heard breathing. Multiple breaths, coordinated. That same year, Eleanor Wick's diary was recovered beneath the collapsed remains of the schoolhouse, preserved by pressure and dryness. Her final entry showed no fear, only acceptance. "The counting is finished," she had written. "The arrangement is complete. It is easier when we do not resist." The archivist who compiled the Harrowfield file added a final note in 1931. He observed that every disappearance followed the same pattern: no struggle, no sound, no violence. It was as though the village had been gently folded downward, preserved rather than destroyed. He wondered if the people had been taken at all, or if they had simply been repositioned. The warning in the ledger was never removed. Former settlement site. Do not reserve a. Because Harrowfield was not lost, it descended. And sometimes, when winter comes early and the snow falls too heavily, the ground hums again, not as a threat, but as a reminder that the earth remembers where Harrowfield went, and that it is still counting.